So JJK chapter 159, guys. I'm here to do a little review. And it looks like we got ourselves a Hunter x Hunter chapter. And what I mean by that is it's a dialogue heavy chapter. But I'm going to try and help break this down because it does, go on and on and on, text bubble for text bubble. But, there's nothing wrong with that. This is what I love about JJK. We get perspectives for upcoming characters that are going to be in this calling game, and we get a little bit of world building as well, right? We get to know what's going on outside of our Jujutsu world, right? So, let's start at the beginning, man. So, we have this kid named Oi. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, but he's been convicted of a crime, right? And they mention at the beginning, Japan's criminal justice system has a 99% conviction rate. Interesting, right? And so, actually, hang on. Let me check something. Oh, wow. Okay, so that is actually somewhat of a fact that Japan's conviction rate is actually 99%. Over 99%. Wow, okay. So, that's a nice little add-on. Okay, so, anyway. We've got this kid named Oi, right? He was confronted by the police. Police followed him into his apartment, and they found a bloody kitchen knife, right? And the reason he was kind of apprehensive and running away from the police is because he had a cat at home. His apartment that he lived in had a no pet policy, so if he were arrested or something, he thought his cat would die or that they would find out about his cat. So, why were they arresting him? Well, it's because there was this murder, right? Mother and daughter. And it was in the Iwate prefecture in Morioka City. They were basically, like I said, they were murdered. They were killed. The Morioka District Attorney prosecuted Oi Keita, a man who lived nearby, under the suspicion that he robbed and murdered the two. The story is up to his arrest, or the story up to his arrest goes like this, right? So they basically explained that Oi ran away from the officers, and then they discovered the kitchen knife in his home, and based off of that, they arrested him. Now, Oi insisted on his innocence in this whole entire thing, that he never committed it. He just found the knife, right? And then we pick up to what's going on currently, and he basically said, look, I picked up the knife, it's not mine. I was going to report it, but I never got around to it. He said he was basically going to report it later, right? And then we get introduced to his defense team, right? Higuruma and Shimizu, which seems to be Higuruma's assistant in this, right? And they're both defense attorneys. So Higuruma is looking more into Oi's background. And the reason he took on this case is because, based off of the information he gathered and wanting to believe in Oi, he was like, well, I want to take this case, even though Shimizu thinks this is an open and shut case, basically. Like, hey, they found the kitchen knife in his home. Like, what else is there? Like, do you really believe the BS that this guy is spewing about, oh, I was going to return it to the police later? Do you really believe that? But he looked into Oi, and this is what he found out, right? He said, I'm beginning to think he's telling the truth after considering the non-profit organization that he lives and works at. Their main activities include providing shelter for and aiding the elderly with living independently. Oi worked there as a caretaker, right? So it sounds like, for the most part, innocent guy. And he doesn't take any paychecks. He just gets like an allowance and some provisions. And despite that, he still has to pay 50,000 yen a month for rent, right? And so what information I think he gathered after this was that basically in that apartment area that they live in, there's a lot of criminals there. Because he says, I also heard that a decent amount of the people there have a criminal record, right? And the reason I think that is because Oi later then mentions that it's an inconvenience to call the police or the ambulance there. And I'm assuming that's an inconvenience because there's a lot of criminals in that area, right? And if different, let me know in the comments. But yeah, so pretty much based off of that, he wants to look more into this and see, what this so-called organization that he works at is about. Is it some kind of shady organization, this non-profit place? Is there more to it? And he's basically off of this, he's like, there's a reasonable chance that Oe is innocent. So based off of that, he put Shimizu to work and was like, look, just keep up on this case. We're going to dig up information, and from there, we're going to try and get this guy not guilty of this crime, right? And so Shimizu is basically like, she's walking from her job, basically saying in her head, like, look, I'm a defense attorney. I don't get paid much in the first place. Why is he trying to go for these cases that are pretty much, open and shut case in her opinion, right? And she even talks about it more with another person that she's having, looks like, coffee with, Takagi-san, or what is it? Takagi-san, right? With this girl named Takagi. And she also knows Higuruma. And she basically says that he's gotten worse. She mentions when he was working at my place, he was in charge of dangerous driving injuries. More specifically, drunk driving cases. And she goes on about this case of a 19-year-old who was kind of peer pressured into driving while under the influence, and the people that were involved kind of collaborated their stories, and he got convicted. And I guess what happened was, even though he got convicted, what Higuruma said to his client was, look, at most I can get your sentence suspended. But he never mentioned about him completely getting off. And so that's what kind of ticked off this guy, and that's why he called him a liar in the chapter, right? And then we kind of get into Higuruma's psyche, and Takagi goes on saying, rescuing the weak, that's noble and all, but us lawyers can only do so much without understanding from the court and the prosecutor. There's no need to continue just to gain unwarranted resentment from your client, right? And he feels like, look, in my opinion, they've been pushed into a corner financially and mentally. I'm not going to get mad at him for getting mad at me, but you can already tell, like, this guy wants to help, right? So, they kind of veer off from the conversation, which is like a flashback, and then they continue on into the present. So we see Shimizu and Higuruma doing their research. The verdict is in, and the defendant is not guilty. Everyone's shocked in the court. Higuruma looks, kind of relieved. Shimizu can't believe it. And then we get a little outside world comment and interaction, and it looks like it's from a bunch of newspapers and websites. Kind of looks like comments from Twitter. How much did they bribe? The judiciary is dead. The prosecutor is useless, right? So we're seeing, in real time comments and opinions from people in the paper and on the internet. So continues on, right? And he basically points out, what helped Oe in all this. He said the stolen objects were not found in your room. There was someone who went missing from the nonprofit org soon after the crime, and you were found on the security camera of the convenience store during the estimated time of the crime derived. So basically, he was in a different place during the time of this. So, it makes sense. That's why he was found not guilty. And someone went missing soon after the crime, right? And then Oe is basically thanking Higuruma, and he's basically thanking him because he believed in him from the start. And you see him tearing up here, and pretty sad. But then we get a lot more info, right? So the appeal, the secondary trial, guilty verdict, life in prison. And to kind of sum this up, the defense attorney Higuruma didn't have any new evidence. He had the same evidence, and his plight in the whole thing was, where was it? He said instead, or they mentioned instead, they simply made an absurd claim for burden of proof, saying that there is no reason to suspect the missing person of the crime, right? And based off this, the sentence was overturned. A tertiary trial by the Supreme Court has a narrow gate. Appeals hardly ever make it up to them. It's difficult to even have them hear the case. So basically, it's saying that there's really nowhere for this to go, right? It's done. There's no hope for this guy. And right after that, we get a crazy panel of just a zoom in on this guy's eyes, and you can kind of see the anger and just, yeah, he's pissed. And then they kind of zoom out, and it's like a combination of him being sad and pissed off at the same time, and Higuruma can't believe it. And he says internally, why do you look at me with those eyes, right? And then we flash back to the conversation that he had with Tagaki, right? And this is going to give a little bit of his psyche right here, and I want to read this. I don't consider myself a savior of the weak. It's always been my nature that I'm unable to ignore something that I felt was wrong. That part of me was never fixed. The goddess of justice blinds her eyes for the equality under the law, and people are capable of turning a blind eye to anything if it's to save their own skin, right? Meanwhile, in order to avoid shaking off the hands that reach out to me for help, even if no one else does, I want to keep my eyes open. So Higuruma, his thinking is, it's just not in me when I think something is wrong to just ignore it. I have to do something. I have to at least try. That's why, I'm not going to, look at this with a blind eye. I will continue to have my eyes open. And that's just how he is. And then here we go, right? They said if there are any objections to this decree, please submit a petition within 15 days, including today. And then Higuruma stands up and says, we're having a retrial. And you see behind him a cursed spirit holding the scale. So this is his own liberty of justice right behind him. So yeah. Just like the comedian a couple chapters back, we have another participant in the culling game. And that's a chapter. Very, very interesting. I like these little excerpts of certain people that we will be seeing in the culling game. I wonder how many more people we'll get. And I really think that he's highlighting like the comedian and like this guy, Higuruma, the defense attorney, because they're going to become key players in the future of this calling game. But there's definitely going to be other people that we just won't know about, right? Like the guy that was in the last chapter. Oh my gosh, I'm blanking on his name. But he's from the Heian era that Sukune lived in. So, yeah. Definitely a wordy chapter, but, you got to love the world building, man. And we get it all in one chapter. Because it looks like next chapter is going to be Itadori and the group are finally going to head into the colony. So, yeah. Let me know what you guys think of the chapter, man. Pretty good, pretty solid. I'll see you guys next week.